Hey guys! Welcome to my video about the myths and misconceptions surrounding DID and OSDD. I tried my very best to make this video as inclusive as I possibly could, and honestly the list is really long and it's kind of sad to look at when you're together. Hold up. This is my script for the video. The list is so long I couldn't even script on my notebook. I ended up just resorting to the whiteboard because I didn't have enough space and I had to move things around as I sorted through the list. And even though the list is that long, and just looking at it makes me sad knowing how many misconceptions there are about DID. There's bound to be more myths and misconceptions that aren't on this list and that I won't end up talking about today. And I'm sorry if I missed one that specifically impacted you, but I tried my best. And I also want to send out a huge thank you to any friends who helped me brainstorm this list for today, because most importantly, this video is a team effort. I asked some of my friends to help me out with brainstorming this list, so a huge thank you goes out to all of them who helped me come up with this giant list. I also want to insert a short disclaimer about how this video is far from perfect, and as research continues forward, some of these misconceptions might actually be proven to be true or to be not true. Some of what's stated in this video might end up being incorrect in the future, and I'm sorry about that. I promise I did my very best to keep all of this as factually correct to what we know now. So let's get started. Our first misconception is that DID doesn't exist. And well, if you believe this, I don't know why you're watching my channel. But DID has been verified as a disorder over and over and over by professionals. I don't really have much else to say about this. Misconception number 2. The diagnosis multiple personality disorder is still effective and can be switched out with DID or OSDD. This is not true. Multiple personality disorder as a diagnosis is really old and it's super outdated. Not only has it been outdated both in the DSM for 2 whole revisions, it horribly misconstrues the disorder as a personality disorder, when in fact this disorder is a dissociative disorder by nature. The term also carries a lot of stigma for the community, and all of us would just feel better if it was left in the past. So please, never use multiple personality disorder when describing DID or OSDD. Our next misconception is that DID and OSDD are very rare disorders, and you'll almost never come across someone who has one of them. The official statistics for DID and OSDD is 1 to 3% of the population, and while this might not seem like a lot of the population, you have to keep in mind what these percentages actually mean. For example, the percentage of people with red hair is 2% of the population, which is smack dab between 1 and 3% of DID/OSDD. Therefore, if you know someone with red hair, it is also probable that you know someone with DID or OSDD. What this means is that while DID and OSDD have a low percentage rating, the population is so large that that's still 3 out of every 100 people, and that's not that rare at all. Our next category of misconceptions is formation misconceptions. These deal with how people think DID is formed. Our top reasoning for why DID exists as a diagnosis is the theory of structural dissociation, and this is backed up by the latest, most sound research in the field. The misconceptions about how DID is formed other than this theory of structural dissociation are all incorrect. Some of the common ones is that DID is therapy-induced, incorrect. People can be born with DID, also incorrect. DID and OSDD are caused by repeated childhood abuse. And this childhood abuse has its own misconceptions. Some people think that only CSA survivors, cult survivors, or torture survivors can have DID or OSDD. This is incorrect. DID and OSDD can form from any sort of repeated trauma. This includes wars, medical traumas, emotional abuse, and all sorts of other traumatizing things to a child. The fourth misconception around trauma and formation is that some people think that neglect is not enough to cause DID, and this fits directly in with the above misconception. Overall, DID is the brain's reaction to trauma, so it's hard to actually put down a scale of like, this is trauma that can cause DID versus this is trauma that can't. It really depends on each individual's brain's ability to deal with the trauma, whether the trauma is too much for the brain or whether the brain can handle it without splitting into multiple alters. What each brain can handle varies by individual, so we can never really put a marker on what trauma can and can't cause DID. It's all based on the individual and their experiences in their brain and their body. Similar to formation misconceptions, some people think DID is just another form of another disorder. DID is not schizophrenia, it's not BPD, it's not bipolar, It's not any other form of psychiatric disorder. It is its own separate category, which is why it has the name dissociative identity disorder. Similarly, some people have misconceptions that DID can't be comorbid with other psychiatric disorders. DID can be comorbid with one or multiple other disorders, such as BPD, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety. Basically, DID can basically be comorbid with almost anything. Because it's a trauma-based disorder, you can have other trauma disorders or disorders that aren't impacted by trauma at all at the same time as having DID. The way this comorbidity also interacts with having alters has some misconceptions attached as well. Some people think that the whole system has to have a disorder when it's comorbid, or only one alter can have a disorder when it's comorbid, and in the reality, comorbidity presents differently depending on the disorder. If it's a disorder that's developed throughout life, such as depression, anxiety, or any other trauma-based disorders, it can affect singular alters or the whole system. But if it's a disorder that's based specifically only by genetics, such as autism, then that disorder affects the whole system. But it might affect different alters in different ways. Therefore, one alter might present more heavily with that disorder, while one alter might present with little or none. Next misconception is that DID is easy to spot. Or, the common phrase that's bounced back at people with DID is that I would know if you have DID. This really comes from two separate reasons. The first reason is that people think that alters are really easy to differentiate from each other and that switching is very easily spotted in other people. In fact, this is covered in something called covert versus overt DID. In overt DID, you get a presentation very similar to the United States of Tara. Alters are very, very open about being alters and present very, very differently than each other. This is where you get the whole stereotype about alters changing clothes every time they switch and alters acting very, very differently in the front. Overt DID only affects about 6% of the people who have DID maximum. On the other hand, most of the people who have DID or OSDD have covert DID, where in public, the disorder hides itself. Alters are very good at impersonating each other and making sure that other people don't find out about their disorder. Most systems are like this, and in reality, if someone has covert DID, it's very hard to spot if you are not a professional. I can't tell you the amount of times some of my alters have done things where I've gone, okay, people have to notice this, and it just like flies right over their head. So even if someone thinks that DID is very easy to spot and they would be able to spot it right away, most likely that answer is no, because unless the system has directly came out to you, there's a very little chance that the alters will actually present as themselves instead of impersonating the host or pretending to be one person. Our next misconception is that alters are just ego states or emotional states. I actually have an entire video about this, which I will link directly down into this description. But the short version is that no, they are not. Alters are completely different individuals who have different likes, dislikes, and opinions on the world. They can overlap with each other, such as two alters both being kind, or they can be different from each other and have different reactions to the world. Alters have completely different thought processes and should be treated as the individuals they are. Our next misconception is that alters are inherently evil, and this is just so completely false. Alters and DID/OSDD are a coping mechanism and are a survival mechanism. Alters are there for your brain and body's protection. DID and OSDD is what helped me survive. Alters aren't inherently evil and they aren't working against me. Alters are there for the system's protection and will work for the good of the system. Our next misconception is that people with DID or OSDD are never aware of their alters. The blatant answer is no. But reality is it's more of a progression in life towards discovering alters. There's people with DID who have known their entire lives that something is kind of up and that they're definitely not one person, but sometimes they just don't have a name for it. Or there's people who don't know they have alters until they discover them. Rarely does an individual with DID or OSDD go throughout their entire life without ever knowing that they're part of a system. Our next misconception is that alters are never ever aware of other alters' activities. Time loss, blackout amnesia is a thing in DID systems, but it's there sometimes, but not all the times between alters. There's such things as co-consciousness and co-fronting, where two alters are in control of the body, or multiple alters are aware of what's going on at once. If alters were never able to be aware of their other alters' activities, What would be the point of therapy? Because a lot of therapy is actually devoted towards increasing communication between the alters and getting them to recognize what's going on when another alter fronts, and getting them to talk between each other more often. Our next misconception is that systems can't split later in life after the formation period for DID. There's a period between birth and ages 6 to 9 where you have to experience continual trauma to have DID or OSDD in the first place. This misconception is concerning the fact that after you've passed the age of 9 years old, some people think that you can no longer gain new alters. This is incorrect. If you experience enough trauma and enough stress in your life, and your brain is unable to handle it, if you have previously developed DID, your alters can continue to split off and to split into more alters, because that's how your brain is used to handling and coping with that trauma and stress. Our next misconception is that DID can be formed in adulthood. This is not true, because the way DID forms is that when you are born, your infant self has a whole bunch of different ego states that are for conceiving of different things in your life, such as separate emotions, attachment to your caregivers, or receiving food. As you develop normally, these ego states slowly integrate into one person around the ages of 6 to 9. But if trauma happens between those times, then that's when those ego states are unable to integrate and form different alters that solidify and have dissociative barriers between them. As I just explained, that range is from birth to 6 to 9 years old. That's when you can develop DID. After you reach that cutoff point, you are unable to form DID. The trauma has to be experienced before you hit that barrier line and integrate into one solid person. After you integrate into one solid person, trauma you receive gives you things like PTSD and CPTSD and other traumatic disorders. Our next misconception is that you cannot have a functional life with DID or OSDD. This is false. It just is. With DID or OSDD, you can have a wonderfully functional life. I know many DID and OSDD systems who work, who contribute to society. I know 2 of them that got married recently. I'm in college, and I'm planning on graduating and doing research in neuroscience and trauma-based disorders. Multiplicity and me just had a baby, and I know other systems who are wonderful parents to the children that they have. People with DID and OSDD can live wonderful lives, and that disorder is not stopping us from achieving fulfilling things that are different for each of us. We are wonderful, emotional, capable beings who can do whatever we set our minds to. Our next misconception happens when we tell people that we have DID and OSDD, and they go, "Oh, so it's just like split?" And I can't tell you how much that infuriates me, but the answer is no. We are not just like split, for so many different reasons. Split is a horrible, ableist pile of crap that gets a lot of things wrong. And the worst part is it combines those things that gets wrong and then has a psychologist say those things directly from their mouth. So, without going into a full plot-by-plot analysis of the movie, I'm just gonna warn you, don't trust the things from that movie, and they're not accurate. Some little tiny gems here and there might be accurate, but overall, no, people with DID and OSDD are not like split. Our next set of misconceptions happen around switching specifically. First one is that switching is instantaneous. This is wrong. Switching can take anywhere from a couple seconds to a couple hours or more. Those hour-long ones feel absolutely horrendous to experience, but they definitely exist. Switching is a convoluted, messy thing that sometimes can be really easy and sometimes it's not. Next one about switching is that it can happen on demand, or that it never happens on demand. Switching sometimes happens on demand, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on how much communication you have with your system. It's one of the goals of therapy to be able to switch more consistently on demand, but even people with years and years and years and years of therapy still have situations where they just can't. And that's totally normal, and it's totally fine. Don't expect a system to be able to do either always switch on command or to never switch on command, because it's always in this big gray zone in the middle. Our next misconception is that alters always know when they fronted, and that ties right into alters always know why they fronted. Alters can be thrust directly into the front with no idea when, why, what, how, anything that's going on. Sometimes I can just be thrown into the front and I have no idea why I'm there or what I'm doing or what just happened. And that's totally normal across all systems. Sometimes you can know why you're there if it's a nice controlled switch and everything is nice and calm around you, but there are definitely times when you are just yanked from the headspace and then all of a sudden you're in the front and you have to kind of like make sense of your situations. Our next misconception is that systems always have an inner world, and an inner world is a place where alters can be, and the name is pretty self-explanatory. It's a place inside your head where alters can meet and be together, and they kind of exist there. Inner worlds can exist in both systems and singlets, but just because they do exist doesn't mean that every system has one. I know we didn't come with an inner world, and we had to manually build one ourselves. So it really varies system by system. Our next misconception is that all alters can access this inner world, and sometimes they just can't, and sometimes they just do. It varies system by system, and it varies alter by alter in that system as well. I know I have a much harder time accessing the inner world than the rest of my alters. Third misconception about inner worlds is that all alters know what they look like in the inner world. Each alter has a different presentation in the inner world based on what the brain needed during trauma. Some alters can know really easily what this presentation looks like, but some alters have a much harder time figuring out what they look like inside. It varies alter to alter and system to system, like pretty much everything else. Next big misconception is that all alters have the same opinion on external people. Each individual alter can have their own opinion on an external person. Some alters can like them, some people can dislike them, some alters can have a crush on them, which leads directly into the next misconception. All alters date a person if the system is dating a singlet. When a system dates a singlet, any number of alters from one to the whole system can date that person. When it comes to systems dating other systems, some people think that two systems dating can't really happen. It can. I knew two systems who got married recently, and their relationship is absolutely wonderful. When it comes to a system dating another system, one relationship can happen in the system, or multiple alters from each system can date each other, which is a very interesting experience. Our next misconception, which is also about dating, is that alters cannot date each other. Because alters have completely separate identities and are completely separated from each other, you feel like you're separate individuals, and alters can date one another in system. Personally, this has never happened to us, so I don't have a lot to say on this issue, but I do know other systems who have had alters date each other within its system, and it is possible, and it does happen. This leads directly into our next misconception, that alters can't be family. Because of the way trauma happens, it's very common for alters to have familial connections with each other. This is very similar to if one alter is a mother figure in the system, such as Lorianne and ours, or if there's father figures, or younger alters, or siblings. It happens all the time, and it's honestly really common. Our next misconception is about original alters, which is an entire rant on itself, and I have a video planned on this exact topic, so when I release that, the link will be down in the description. But for now, I'm going to do a quick summary. Some people think that systems have an original, which is like the core of a system, and that all the alters split off that one alter called the original. It is a misconception that all systems have an original, or that systems have an original in the first place, but that's a whole nother video. Another misconception that goes directly along with this is that the host has to be the original. This is also not true. The host is a role that changes between alters over time, and therefore is not stuck on one alter like original would be. Again, that's a debate for another video in the description. Our next misconception is that fictional and factional interjects are a sign of faking. Not only are these types of alters been approved by professional dissociation specialists over and over and over and over and over again. Number 2, if you ever think anything is a sign of a system faking, take a step back. Go, am I a professional? If that answer is no, stop right there. It's never okay to talk about whether another system is faking or not, if you are not a professional that has worked with them directly. Another misconception is people think that littles as an alter type, alters who are below the age of a teenager, is the same thing as age regression. And this is inherently incorrect, because older alters, when they age regress, are the same person. When a little switches, they are completely different than other older alters. Another misconception is that alters can die. This is untrue. There might be some alters who present as dead, but this is often a symptom of trauma, and these alters still exist within the brain and are never truly gone. Another misconception that is very similar is that alters can spontaneously integrate. This is untrue. Integration takes a lot of work and a lot of effort on both alters that are integrating together. Our next misconception is that dormancy is the same thing as alter death or alter integration. This is incorrect. When an alter goes dormant, they don't die. They still exist. They are still them, and they don't integrate. They are still separate, but they just don't front, and they are not active in the system. These three things are all completely separate phenomena, except for the death. That is a myth. We have a couple more integration myths, which is when an older alter and a little alter integrate, they must always become an age slider. This is incorrect. They could be an age slider, or they could not be. And finally, our last set of myths are about OSDD-1B in particular. The first one is that OSDD-1B is not as real or valid as DID, and that is incorrect. OSDD-1B as the diagnosis is just as real and valid as DID. Second myth, and our final one for the day, is that OSDD-1B does not have as differentiated alters as DID. This is incorrect. OSDD-1B alters can be just as differentiated as DID alters and have just the same amount of emotional range and difference from one another. Thank you for sitting through this really long video, and I hope this has helped clear things up for you guys. It has been a challenge to make and a joy to produce, and I really hope that this list can be much, much shorter in the next couple years. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.